By the end of 1938, Western newspaper coverage of Austria was dominated by a single terrifying narrative. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party had successfully annexed the nation, a chilling prologue to the horrors that were to come. Each week brought news stories of book burnings and violence against Austria's Jewish and Roma populations. Unsurprisingly, these reports overshadowed all other crimes of the era. After all, what need was there to give the public another villain? But from the madness of Hitler's tyrannical takeover, a single woman managed to emerge, reviled enough to draw attention away from the other horrors that were unfurling, at least for a moment. This is the story of Martha Marek, Austria's most frightful fraudster. Her crimes are legendary, but even today the details of Martha Marek's life remain clouded by the Nazis, whose control of the Austrian media meddled with facts and obscured truth. She was likely born near Vienna in either 1897 or 1904. Her birth date is muddled with that of her sister. Martha's childhood was desperately unhappy. According to some reports, she was orphaned soon after birth. In others, she's reportedly given away to be raised by a poor couple until rejoining her mother at age 12. She found work at a dressmaker's shop as an errand girl, likely hoping to eventually learn the trade herself. It was as much as an impoverished girl might hope for, but Martha was destined for another path altogether. While running an errand one day, Martha met Moritz Fritsch, the owner of a lucrative department store in downtown Vienna. Some sources place this meeting in Martha's early teen years, others when she was 17. Fritsch took an instant interest in the girl and noticed she was obviously underfed and poorly clothed in thin garments. Soon after their meeting, Fritsch began a relationship with Martha, this despite being some 50 years her senior. Again, the details are unclear. It's possible that Martha's mother, if she were still alive, allowed her daughter to live with Fritsch as his ward. Still, other sources claim Martha's family blackmailed the older man with threats of reporting his inappropriate relationship with the teen. Fritsch appeased them by promising to take over all financial responsibility for Martha. Moritz arranged for her to attend prestigious finishing schools in Paris and London, where she saw for the first time the drastic difference wealth could make in someone's life. Once back in Vienna, Martha moved into Fritsch's villa in Döbling, a prestigious enclave bordering the Vienna woods. Though he showered her with jewellery, clothing and other gifts, he could not hold her attention, and she soon began a clandestine affair with Emil Marek, an engineering student closer to her own age. In August 1923, 74-year-old Moritz Fritsch died, leaving most of his estate, including his villa, to Martha. Within months of the sudden demise, Martha married Emil, and the pair revelled in their good fortune. With so much wealth at their disposal, Emil quit school to pursue his own ideas for engineering innovations and inventions. He had some early luck generating interest in his proposal to bring electricity to Burgenland, Austria's newest and least developed province, recently seized from the Hungarian Soviet Republic. While he was entangled in negotiations with possible investors, the Mareks took out a life insurance policy with the Anglo-Danubian Lloyd Company in Vienna. According to the policy terms, Martha would receive a large payment as Emil's widow if he died. But in the event of Emil's permanent disability, the Mareks would receive an even more extravagant sum, $400,000 according to one source. The policy was purchased on May the 25th, 1925, and the Mareks made their first premium payment on June the 11th. The very next day, Emil Marek had a terrible, life-altering accident. According to the pair, Emil had been chopping wood in the garden at their villa with a razor-sharp hatchet when his hand slipped. The tool struck his left leg just above the knee, nearly severing the limb completely. Martha, upon hearing Emil's screams, summoned a doctor who found that Emil's leg was attached by only a bit of sinew and quickly completed the amputation, leaving Emil permanently disabled. When the Mareks filed a claim, the insurance company was shocked by the bizarre gruesomeness of the accident. Not since the First World War had the insurer had to pay out such a large amount, and they immediately ordered an investigation into the claim. Doctors examined the injuries and discovered marks that indicated the leg had been struck by the hatchet at least 3 times. In November 1926, the Mareks invited Karl Mraz, a former orderly at the hospital where Emil was treated for his injuries, to their home. The couple tried to persuade Mraz into testifying that he'd heard doctors at the hospital discussing a plan to alter Emil's leg so it appeared to have been removed by several strikes, not a single blow. They also wanted Mraz to tell the court that the doctors had said the insurance company would take care of them for their help in disguising the accidental injury. But word of the attempted bribery reached the police, and the couple was arrested and charged with conspiring to defraud an insurance company and corrupt justice. When their trial began in March 1927, the pair were the public favourites. The young couple was attractive and poised, living in one of the most desirable areas of Vienna. What reason would they have for attempting such a scam? And what healthy young man would purposefully chop off his own leg? It seemed much more likely that the insurance company was a corrupt capitalist enterprise trying to avoid paying on a policy they'd sold to the Mareks. The outcome of the case hinged on the prosecution's ability to convince the jury that Emil's leg had been struck by the hatchet multiple times, likely wielded by Martha. The defense argued that the additional marks on the leg could have been caused by the wooden chopping block which had fallen on top of Emil after the accident. On April the 9th, the Mareks were acquitted on insurance fraud charges but found guilty of attempted corruption. They were sentenced to 4 months in prison but had already served as much time awaiting their trial and were released at its conclusion. Karl Mraz was sentenced to 6 weeks in prison for considering the Mareks' attempt to sway his testimony. Despite having proven that the Mareks were at least partially guilty, the insurance company was still the clear loser in the public eye. Eager to preserve their reputation, the insurer settled quietly with the Mareks out of court for about $50,000, or the modern equivalent of just over $1 million. Nearly half of that amount went to paying off the Mareks' legal fees, but with careful management, it still should have been enough to ensure a life of comfort for the couple. With Emil's hopes of electrifying Burgenland long since dashed, he tried his hand at several other business ventures, including investing in a taxi fleet. But before long, they had squandered their wealth and were forced to move to Algiers, where Emil worked for a radio firm. Martha gave birth to a son, Alphonse, in 1929, and the small family returned to Vienna the following year. They added a daughter, Ingeborg, in 1932. According to one report, the Mareks were forced to relocate to a low-cost area of Vienna, with Emil boarding with his parents to save money. The couple were reunited in July, after which Emil became dangerously ill. Since losing his leg, he had struggled with various health issues, but this time he seemed to melt away entirely. He lost weight rapidly, became blind, and was sequestered away in a Vienna hospital, where he died on July the 31st, supposedly of tuberculosis. His death drew some public interest, thanks to the high-profile fraud trial. When it was revealed that Martha had collected a small amount of life insurance money following his death, locals began to question the man's sudden illness. But again, sympathy won out. Martha was a widow with 2 small children. What woman would choose such a life in exchange for a paltry insurance settlement? Then Ingeborg fell ill too. Her symptoms, similar to those of Emil, quickly took her life. By the beginning of September 1932, Martha was burying another family member and collecting another small insurance payment. In 1934, she suddenly forged a close relationship with her aging widowed aunt, Susanne Lowenstein. Suzanne allowed her niece to move in with her under the promise that she would help care for her in old age. Suzanne had been in good health when Martha arrived, but within months she was bedridden. When she too died, it was discovered that Martha had been named the sole heir to her modest fortune. Though she was once again reasonably well off, Martha still struggled to manage her money. By 1936, she was advertising for boarders to earn extra cash. A middle-aged seamstress named Felicitas Kittenberger moved in that spring, but she, again, soon died after falling suddenly ill with symptoms remarkably similar to those of Emil, Ingeborg, and Suzanne. 4 days after Felicitas' death, Martha collected on an insurance policy she'd convinced her boarder to purchase. In October 1936, she filed a police report claiming that she'd been robbed. Inspector Rudolf Pieternel visited Martha's home, where the walls had been stripped of valuable tapestries and paintings that had once belonged to Susanne Lowenstein. According to Martha, she was a heavy sleeper and did not awaken as the bandits stole away with her artwork. She was extraordinarily calm for a woman who'd just been robbed in the night. She assured Pieternel that a large insurance policy on the home would cover the loss of the items. Pieternel found it odd that the burglars would steal such bulky items, as most nighttime robberies were of smaller goods like silverware and jewellery, which could be easily tucked in pockets and allowed for a quick escape. The insurance company also found the claim highly suspect and requested an investigation before paying on the policy. Detectives learned from the claimant's neighbours that on the night of the robbery, she'd been seen moving several large packages wrapped in brown paper out of her home and into a small truck. They traced the truck to a storage warehouse where the manager told police that Martha Marek had requested the removal of a list of items from her home on the same night as the alleged robbery. The tapestries and paintings that she had claimed were stolen were safe in the warehouse, where Martha no doubt intended to collect them after she'd cashed her cheque from the insurance company. Martha was arrested and charged with fraud in early 1937. When Felicitas Kittenberger's son Herbert read about Martha's arrest in the papers, he contacted the police and told them he believed the fraudster had poisoned his mother to obtain insurance money. The bodies of Emil and Ingeborg Marek, Susanne Lowenstein, and Felicitas Kittenberger were all exhumed and tested for signs of poison. Each contained large amounts of thallium, a highly toxic heavy metal found in a paste commonly sold to kill rats. Sometimes called the poisoner's poison, thallium is colourless, odourless and tasteless, producing a wide variety of symptoms often seen in other common illnesses. Following these shocking toxicology results, Mrs. Marek was charged with murder. At some point during the investigation into the insurance fraud and poisoning, an investigator familiar with her legal history remembered that Martha had a son, Alphonse. The boy was located living with another family in a poor area of Vienna. According to some sources, Martha had recently insured Alphonse and he was already suffering from signs of thallium poisoning. Martha's trial faced multiple delays following Hitler's annexation of Austria. Her Jewish defense attorneys had to be replaced, and Martha herself was smeared in the Nazi-controlled press as a Mischling, a mixture of Jewish Aryan blood. There is no evidence that Martha had any Jewish ancestry. but the horrific nature of her crimes made her the perfect villain for Nazi propaganda, regardless of truth. While awaiting trial, the defendant exhibited several bizarre behaviours in jail, including faking seizures and feigning blindness and paralysis. When she finally entered the courtroom in May 1938, Martha had to be carried in a specially constructed chair to accommodate her supposed medical conditions. As a defendant, Martha did little to win the jury's sympathy. She was combative and rude, often answering questions sarcastically and shouting at the court. The prosecution presented dozens of witnesses, including police officers, neighbours and doctors. A druggist testified that Martha had ordered so many tubes of rat poison paste from his store that he'd had to increase his order from the wholesaler. A neighbour told the jury that the defendant's son, Alphonse, had once told her, "I shall soon go to heaven. My mother told me so." And Herbert Kittenberger testified that when his mother fell ill, Martha had refused to call a doctor or take her to the hospital until she was hours from death. In his closing arguments, the prosecutor called Martha Marek a human cobra and argued that her acquittal following her first fraud trial a decade earlier had been the death warrant for the 4 poison victims. 5 jurymen and 4 professional judges returned a verdict of guilty, and Martha was sentenced to be hanged. As despicable as Martha's crimes had been, the jurors who convicted her likely never believed she would see an execution day. In Austria, women condemned to death traditionally had their sentences later commuted to life in prison. Even Leopoldine Kasparek, a serial killer who murdered 4 elderly women and attacked nearly a dozen more, was spared from execution despite showing no remorse. No women had been executed in Austria for over 30 years. However, the traditions that once governed the Austrian judicial system could no longer be counted upon. Guillotines were brought to Vienna from Berlin as the Nazis prepared to make a public spectacle of the 1,200 victims sentenced to death by Nazi courts in the city. When Martha Marek's request for clemency found its way to Adolf Hitler's desk, he unsurprisingly showed no remorse. On December 6, 1938, Marek, still claiming to be suffering from paralysis, was wheeled toward the guillotine at the Vienna Regional Court, where Nazi executioner Johann Reichelt waited. According to some reports, Martha regained enough strength to struggle against the guards and aim a kick at Reichelt before she was tied to the bascule and the blade of the guillotine released. Later, it would be reported that in her final days, Martha had begged for the guillotine over the other offered means of execution, the axe. Is it possible that she was remembering the 3 chops it had taken to remove Emil's leg? The story of Martha's crimes and execution was printed in nearly every major paper in the West. She was the worst kind of monster, a mother who would kill her own child and many more in exchange for a few bucks. Even so, her story was quickly overshadowed by the evils of Nazi occupation. Thanks to a coincidence of timing, Martha's villainy was forgotten for decades. But her crimes are a grim reminder that even in the shadows of Hitler's horrors, other monsters remained, wielding their own wickedness like a well-sharpened axe. Thank you for watching. Right then. Take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, "Well, I never."